The views and opinions expressed on the Hard Time Podcast are of the hosts and guests individually. The Hard Time Podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not affiliated with any entity, agency, or department. Human beings have thoughts and feelings that do not necessarily affect the professional performance of their duties.
Welcome to the Hard Time Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Motherfucker Welder. Happy Festivus, if that's what you observe. Hopefully you broke out the stainless steel pole. Let me know what feat of strength you're using this year. As mentioned, I'm your host, Jake Motherfucker Welder, a lowly sergeant in the American Southwest. And it's just after Christmas time. So if you're catching this, hopefully you caught a couple of our special episodes. John dropped a couple of the ones honoring people who had us on featured on their Spotify Wrapped. So he had Christy and Megan on, a couple of our top listeners from the last year, had them on, and they shared some of their experiences touring some state prison and or state school and national prison. So if you haven't checked those out yet, check those episodes out. We appreciate their support of Hard Time. It's always good to get some feedback from our listeners, and it was really nice that John was able to do that. So as mentioned, I'm Jake. We're getting near the holidays here, so it's getting to the time where everybody's using the cheesy joke, see you next year. People are clearing out for the year. It's getting pretty sparse around the jail. If you're unfortunate enough to be in jail this time of year, then you're lucky if you get a court date, if it doesn't get pushed out a couple weeks. So yeah, it's getting pretty sad around the jail. Not a lot going on. It's been pretty uneventful for the most part. I won't say the Q word because I have to work a little extra this week to cover the sergeant that covers nights on my side of the week. His family is on vacation, so I'll be working some extra long shifts here. So I figured I would get this episode recorded and get it ready for release. So by the time you hear this, I'll have completed the family holiday in an undisclosed location somewhere in the Rocky Mountain Range in the Southwest. And then we'll have done that family traditions and stuff with the family. And then pulled a couple 16-hour shifts in a row. So just to prove I can still do it. I mean, I do 12s all the time. So what's an extra 4 hours? So it'll limit the family time a couple nights in a row, cut into that little bit, but it'll help the paycheck, but it'll be a little less time for Hard Time. So I'm getting these recorded ahead of time for you guys to make sure that we keep the flow of content for our faithful listeners. So Commiefornia, the state of California. We've covered it quite extensively on this show, but I figured we'd get into a little bit more. I've studied a little bit on the subject of California, the politics of it, done a little bit more in-depth research. We have a few people, a few listeners of Hard Time that do and have worked in California corrections. So it's not that there aren't, I don't want to say that there aren't decent agencies in the state of California, just like, even places like New York. I lived in New York for a while, and even though the state overall has a lot of issues, even though they only have one actual football team. They have a lot of problems. So, for every Buffalo Bills team, you have a Jets and you have a Giants. So, yeah, same thing with California. You may have some up in the north and stuff, and maybe even in some of the urban areas, you may have some sheriff's office or some agencies that are decent, that are probably decent to work for. But a lot of the agencies and stuff in California, unfortunately, because of the politics of the state, make things extremely difficult. I'm kind of in the same situation where I'm at. The state politics can be difficult, but they don't push too hard where I'm at you know, because of the area I'm at. They don't push too hard because there's would be enough conservative backlash that they don't want to push too much liberalism. But they try occasionally. So I deal with that, but I work for a good agency, so I know what that's like. So I don't want to pretend, to demonize all of California and say that all of California corrections are doomed and that, there's no decent agencies out there. But we're going to talk mostly about Gavin Newsom's policies, and then talk about some specific instances. So maybe not even these facilities or agencies aren't doing the right things, but there's some indications in these reports, some of these deaths that are occurring in California, that would indicate to me that by their policies and what they're enabling, or rather not allowing their staff to do, as far as uses of force, even in something as extreme as a use of force that's related to a death, you know, um, or what could lead, an act of violence that could lead up to a death, a stabbing or something of that nature, stabbing, strangulation, something like that, improvised weapons. They're not allowing um, staff to intervene, or it doesn't seem like it from multiple reports. So we'll get into that later on in the show. But I have a couple articles that we can share, of course. Most of this comes from is this the right one? Nope. That's about the Pope. That's a different thing. calmatters.org. So it's an aggregate source here that has, it's a liberal source, but they talk quite a bit about the jails and stuff in California. So they're talking about vacancies and issues and stuff. The first one talks about healthcare employees. Why are there job vacancies in California? That's causing issues. Then they get into a nonprofit for disabled workers. Why is that an issue? Why would that be an issue in jail? And then California spending and closing prisons, and then deaths in jail. So there's a couple brief articles here that get into a few things, and then we'll break down a couple in custody deaths and what the problems are there. So mostly from CDCR. Prison healthcare workers are among the best paid public employees. So why are so many jobs vacant? From Kristen Huang, Hwang. Huang. Oh, This is Cal Matters, the only nonprofit newsroom devoted solely to covering issues that affect all Californians. Despite spending hundreds of millions of dollars to fill vacant medical and mental health positions at prisons and state hospitals, California has little to show for it, according to a new report from the state auditor. Job vacancy rates have increased since 2019 at 3 facilities examined in the audit, as has the state's reliance on pricey temporary workers. That's pretty universal. It's something that happens a lot in the healthcare field. They use temporary workers, temp nurses, staffing nurses, to fill positions where they don't want, people don't want to work, and it's pricey. You'll pay 2-3 times what you normally would for the position. Staff nurses, the traveling nurses and stuff make a lot of money. That's why they do it. They know they're going into a facility that needs help and that's going to suck, but they're getting paid handsomely to do it. Workers contend that high vacancy rate leads to more on-the-job assaults, mandatory overtime, and staff turnover. They don't just contend that. That's what happens. A high vacancy rate is self-fulfilling prophecy, said Dr. Stuart Bussey. Man, they have some good names here. President of the Union at the American Physicists and Dentists, which represents 1,300 state psychiatrists. The vacancy rates persisted despite targeted bonuses and wage increases that prison health workers received in contracts and under court orders during the Newsom administrations. Those included $42,000 bonuses for prison psychiatrists in 2023 and $20,000 bonuses the state had doled out to mental health workers through a long-running prisoner rights lawsuit. At face value, some state health workers are comparatively well compensated. At all of the 55 prison employees who earned more than $500,000 in income last year were doctors, dentists, psychiatrists, and medical executives, according to state controller data. The board-certified psychiatrist at Casdero State Hospital. Some of the highest paid state employees can earn more than $397,000 in base pay. They also retire with pensions through the California Public Employees Retirement System. In comparison, that mean wage psychiatrist in California is $328,000. So they're making another $71,000 more than base. But in certain places, local hospitals are offering even more. In Monterey County, $90,000 hiring bonuses are common at private hospitals struggling to fill their own vacancies, staff told auditors. Despite the pay, vacancy rates were highest among psychiatrists at Casdero State Hospital, the second highest at Portersville Development Center at Salinas State Prison, auditors found. All 3 of the audited facilities house individuals who are either incarcerated or institutionalized because they were deemed by the courts to be dangerous or unfit to stand trial. Federal and state law, as well as court rulings, require the state to provide adequate medical and mental health care. As a result, most of the facilities are required to have vacancy rates less than 10%. Over the past 30 years, California has consistently failed to meet that standard. None of the state departments overseeing the facilities have taken necessary steps to ensure adequate staffing, the auditor wrote. So, nobody wants to work there. Nobody wants to work in prisons where they don't feel safe. They don't want to work in facilities where they don't feel safe. They may not feel safe because of policies that were put in place by the state. The state does not allow corrections officers and stuff to intervene and use appropriate force to protect its workers, to protect the inmates, they have this touchy-feely standard, and people get hurt and people get killed. And, you have a few members of staff get injured and word gets around that they're not safe and you can't pay them enough. $71,000 more than the base pay for people is not a lot of money in California when, it costs $400,000 a year just to survive. That's not a lot of money. It sounds like a lot of money in a lot of places around the United States, but in California, where things are ridiculously expensive, where gas prices are almost 3 times what they are in other places in the United States, it's not going to cut it. The facilities had a significant number of vacant positions that were not filled by temporary workers or staff overtime. Neither the Department or State of Hospitals nor the Department of Development Services, which houses some people of the Department of Disabilities in Portersville, had procedures or to adequately evaluate or budget for staffing needs annually. The state hospitals and developmental services departments, as well as the Departments of Corrections and Rehabilitation, have no process to determine whether facilities are meeting staffing minimums during each shift. In a letter to lawmakers, California State Auditor and Grant Parks wrote, the state should conduct a statewide recruitment campaign to hire healthcare workers because of the state's long difficulties with facilities have had in filling vacant healthcare positions and a current projected healthcare profession shortage. In response to the audit, developmental services and state hospital departments partially agreed with the findings in detailed comments. The Department of State Hospitals, however, wrote that the vacancy rates covered during the audit period were significantly affected by COVID-19. Salary savings were overstated. Our hospitals regularly meet or exceed mandated staffing minimums and have self-reported rare occurrences where they have not due to extraordinary circumstances. Department spokesperson Ralph Montano said in an email to Cal Matters, the department has agreed to implement many of the recommendations in the report, Montano added. In a statement, the Corrections Department said it's committed to providing adequate health care for the incarcerated population while ensuring fiscal responsibility. But that's the thing, you can't just pull a licensed healthcare worker out of your ass. Like, if you can take a person that does another job and try to say, oh, boom, now you're a corrections officer, but you can't take someone and give them a medical license and give them a job. Like, that's doesn't work that way. So you have to get these people in to be able to get them to work. And a lot of this doesn't, are like contracts and stuff that doesn't necessarily fall directly under the corrections department. Like, we have contracts with a service that provides them, and we've had some issues with the service at times with different things. So that's part of it. Is whenever we have issues, we refer it to the service and say that we have issues with that service, and they may be doing some of the same things. But yeah, you can't just throw money at the problem. You need healthcare workers. And one of the things I worry that they could try to do is, like they've done with the Department of Transportation, is just take a bunch of unqualified people and start saying that, someone who's, no offense to social workers, but somebody who's a social worker one, and make them a licensed clinical therapist for somebody with severe, mental issues and stuff. And it's not the same thing. You're not a psychiatrist that should be, giving out medications for severe mental issues. It's not the same thing. So we need different people for different things. A behavioral health clinician is completely different than a psychiatrist, and a therapist is different than a social worker. So they need to understand the difference. Workers claim state wastes money to fill vacancies. Kobe Pizzotti, lobbyist for the California Association of Psychiatric Technicians, which represents 6,000 mental health clinicians, said the audit confirmed that many of the state worker unions had suspected the state had continually refused to meaningfully improve wages, benefits, working conditions for employees while spending money on temporary workers. This, the unions contend, makes the vacancy problems worse. Effectively, it's a shadow state employees' workforce. They're not called civil servants. So, yeah, you can't just use temporary workers to completely prop up your workforce. You need to improve things for people so that they want to stay. So let's get into, instead of continuing with those articles, let's get into a nonprofit got jobs for disabled workers in California prisons. A dispute could end them. So this is one of the other things, not getting things for your state workers, not providing, delivering on promises to help with the people that provide services is one issue. That's one issue that, causes problems for the corrections department. You need people, support staff, not just corrections, but you need support staff to keep your corrections department running. This is support staff that they arranged, but Newsom does set up a lot of these programs and stuff, these so-called nonprofits and stuff, and then there is money involved, and where does the money go? This is by Leah Esta. Where is that? No, by Shanath Nangunira. A long simmering dispute between California's largest state employee union and a nonprofit organization that hires disabled workers is coming to a head this summer. Dozens of people could lose their jobs. Local 1000 for several years has been trying to push the state's correctional health care system to terminate its contracts with nonprofit Pride Industries at 2 state prisons where employs dozens of disabled workers and others who are recovering from addictions. Because that's a wonderful idea, to take people who are recovering from addictions and send them into prisons where they have access to inmates who are struggling with the same issues and often have access to drugs. Because of lax policies, there are drugs inside the prison. Great idea. The union contends that those contracts violate protections against outsourcing in civil service, and that the state has not made a good faith effort to fill the positions with state employees. So, it's like a union and state type issue, which is a separate issue from what I'm saying is just not a good idea. Time is running out on Pride's contract for the California medical facility in Vacaville, and it's 74 custodial workers. Last year, the state agency that enforces contracts and personnel decisions found the prison system had not given a compelling reason to outsource the jobs to Pride, setting in motion the dissolution of the nonprofit's work at that side. The evidence submitted by the parties show that the contracted work is essentially janitorial and custodial services in a medical environment that are and can be performed by civil service custodians, wrote Suzanne Ambrose, executive officer of the board. She gave the facility 6 months to terminate the contract. The deadline had been extended twice until November 2024. Many Pride workers have to compete for 45 positions to replace Pride workers next year. The prisons could also hire inmate workers, a plan that Pride argues won't guarantee the facility remains at necessary hygienic standards. Pride, for 9 years, has held on to its contracts providing janitorial services at state prisons in Stockton and Vecchiville, despite pressure from Local 1000. It won work through California Corrections Healthcare Services, which oversees prison health care. The agency argued it could not fill custodial jobs on its own and relied on Pride to do the work. So, yeah. So they're saying we had to bring this outside agency in. My problem with the agency is it's not a bad idea to give people with disabilities jobs. I think it is a bad idea to take people, at-risk individuals, and put them in a prison environment. I don't think that's a good idea, especially people who have substance abuse issues, if that's what they're considering doing here. I don't think that's a great idea. The other issue is Newsom has a penchant. He has a history of setting up rail projects and different things where billions of dollars go missing. So he sets up these projects that sound good on paper, and then these projects go nowhere or effectively do nothing. I mean, these are janitorial jobs that could be done by state employees, and then in sensitive areas they could be done by inmates, and they can be up to hygienic standards as long as the corrections officers are making sure that things are being done correctly. It's done every day. It's done at our facility all the time. Things, you have two options. If something's in a secure side of the facility, the corrections officers have two options. Either they can clean it to make sure it's up to standard, or they can have someone else clean it and make sure it's up to standard to have an inmate clean it. Happens every day and it works. Yeah. So, yeah, they talking about anti-nepotism and stuff in there, and how, the story in here about how, well, I guess I can read it here. Yeah, it says, Chelsea Davis, a Pride operations manager, told lawmakers she struggled for years with her mental health, and she never expected to find a steady job. That changed when she joined Pride in an entry-level position at a Stockton facility that allowed her to keep her doctor's appointments and treatment plans for addiction. They trained me, they guided me, they gave me hope, Davis, who's coming on her 5th year with Pride, told a budget subcommittee. Stories like Davis's appeared to resonate with the two assembly members, Democrat James Ramos of San Bernardino and Republican Tor Lackey of Palmdale, who grilled state prison officials in their handling of the dispute. They questioned why Pride employees could not be directly hired as civil servants. The two lawmakers later wrote the State Personnel Board on April 26 in an attempt to protect Pride workers, resulting in the November 2024 extension. The lawmakers asked for an even longer extension. Pride employees have demonstrated their ability to provide a high level of service of support to the critical need for the state. They wrote Ambrose, asking for an extension on how the Pride through November 25, so that in interested stakeholders could reach a viable long-term solution. So that's the thing. I mean, members of Pride that have worked at the prison and stuff, if they're able to, they could work. If they've been doing this job, they could become state workers. The thing is, they have to be able to be fit for duty. If they're battling with addictions, they have to be able to pass a drug test in order to be a state employee, I'm pretty sure. So can they do that? That might be something that Pride doesn't require for somebody that's struggling with addiction, that the state, being a state employee, probably does require. Another thing is the fit for duty. They required me in my job to be able to pass a physical agility test to be able to do my job. That's a little different for corrections, but even to work like in custodial, you have to be able to lift a certain amount and, walk and, do those sorts of things. And it's fairly strenuous, the test that they give. If they can do those things, more power to them. If they can pass if there's a written exam and stuff, if they can pass the tests and stuff, they should become state employees. That would be great. If they've been used to working in that environment, then I think they should. But if they're, if they're continuing at the at-risk employee, if they're still disabled, if they're still struggling with addictions and stuff, I don't think working in prisons is the best place to be. Maybe Pride needs to work in other areas. There's other custodial positions that they could be filling outside of prisons. Maybe these lawmakers could have them cleaning their offices. That would be an area that might be a little less sensitive, a little less security conscious, that they could offer them a job if they feel so strongly about it. But I don't think the Department of Corrections is a good place for them. With the exception of maybe a few public areas or something. If they're utilizing it there, maybe that would be okay. But damn, if it doesn't sound like a dangerous idea to me. Cal Matters. California is spending more on fewer inmates. Why isn't Newsom closing more prisons? And this is what their goal is, to cut prison budgets and to cut the amount of prisons that they have and to have more people out in the community. Why? Because they want more people voting Democrat. They don't care, if they're victimizing people. They don't care. They're just people. They're just more people doing more huddled masses, people that are relying on their socialist Commiefornia systems. There are people that rely on their social programs and stuff. They don't care. So Governor Newsom faces a huge deficit in the spring, and he has only has one especially big money saving option that he's not using. Let's save money by closing jails. Public safety. Let's save money on public safety. It's a great fucking idea. California's rapidly falling inmate population, because the inmates aren't going away. They're just in public. They're in public. They're still committing crimes. They're just not committing crimes behind bars. They're committing crimes in public. They should go back behind bars here very shortly, but when things swing the other way, you're going to need a place to put them, and you won't have anywhere to put them. I say that by experience because that's what's happening in my state. California's rapidly falling inmate population could allow Newsom to close as many as 5 more prisons, analysts say, saving $1 billion a year at a moment when he's pulling reserves to bring a state budget into the black. Instead, Newsom wants to take a more cautious approach to trimming prison beds. His new budget proposal calls on Corrections Department to close 46 housing blocks inside 13 state prisons. Prison yard closures save money and decrease the need for staffing, but not to the extent of a prison shutdown. Newsom's proposal would save about $80 million. So that is a better idea. It's a lesser of two evils, but you're still letting these people out into the public or causing overcrowding, because now you're saying these blocks are closed and we're not going to man them, so we're only going to have so much staffing. But if you still have, a large number of inmates, you're only going to have so much staff and only so many beds to put them in. You're going to have overcrowding. Inmates population, saying his administration has been scrutinizing the prison's budget. Newsom said, "We're mindful of the direction we're going as it relates to public safety." At the inmates' population peak in 2006, California locked up 165,000 people in state prisons. Today, after a decade of sentencing changes, the federal court intervention, and a surge of releases tied to COVID-19, California's prisons hold about 93,000 people. So it's what? 83,000 people that are emptied out of prisons. 83,000 people that are in communities. Because of that trend, Newsom has already moved to close 4 prisons over the course of his administration. He projects that those shutdowns will save the state $3.4 billion by 2027. He suggested on Friday that the forces fighting prison closures, the labor unions representing prison employees, the communities dependent on prison jobs, legislation and litigation intended to slow or stop closures forced him to take smaller steps than shuttering entire facilities that he crafted to plan to close a projected $27.6 billion deficit. Prison housing unit deactivations can happen much sooner than prison closures and provide us more flexibility, Newsom said. Legislative leaders have asked me, and we are considering collectively reducing the larger footprint in the state. The answer is yes. But we want to do it in a pragmatic and thoughtful way. We want to be mindful of labor concerns and community concerns, he said, while moving his hands in a stupid way like this. We want to be mindful of trends. We want to be mindful of the unknown, meaning there are proposals to roll back some of the criminal justice reforms that could have significant impacts on the census of the population. California cities fight prison closures. So far, Newsom closed the dual vocational institution in Tracy in 2021 and the California Correction Center in Susanville in 2023. He ended a lease with a privately run prison called the California City Correctional Facility, and the Corrections Department is shutting down Chuckwalla Valley State Prison near the Arizona border. Newsom, at Friday's budget press conference, said he would accelerate the proposed March 2025 closure at Chuckwalla Prison in Blythe to November, although his office hasn't yet provided details on how much money that would save the state. That news surprised leaders in Blythe, where city officials had attempted to save the prison as one of the community's major employers. This news is disheartening, to say the least, said Blythe interim city manager Mallory Griselius. Expediting the closure was not discussed with the city prior to it being included in the May revised budget, and we learned about it with everyone else. Our hearts are heavy for the employees and inmates at Chuckwalla State Prison whose lives will be directly impacted when the prison is shuttered. Well, and that's the thing. Shutting prisons sounds like a great idea as far as the liberal agenda, right? But the inmates want to be sometimes housed where they're housed at, because they could be in their community or closer to their community. If you shut the prison down, they get sent oftentimes to a prison that is further away from their families, further away from their community. And, normally I wouldn't give a shit, but sometimes there are halfway decent inmates and stuff that are just doing their time, that, their families and stuff are trying to be halfway decent people, that are supporting their family members that made a mistake. And, you know, we see them week in and week out for visitation that are being supportive. And sometimes they have to travel, you know, hours and hours on end in order to visit because there isn't a facility that's closer. So I just bring that up because, they say shuttering all these prisons is going to be helpful and it's going to be good for inmates. Not necessarily the case. So yeah, because of its declining inmate headcount, California can close up to 5 more of its 33 prisons and 8 yards within operating prisons while still complying with a federal court order that caps the system's capacity. The Legislative Analyst's Office Board found last year. The report estimated the potential savings at $1 billion. The cost of incarcerating prisoners, meanwhile, is more than ever, rising to $132,860 per inmate. Those numbers have prompted Democratic lawmakers over the past several years to press for more closures, particularly as they try to protect social services from budget cuts to put more money into inmate rehabilitation programs. If people you're serving in the departments continue to go down, why is the cost going up? Democratic Assemblyman James Ramos of San Bernardino asked Corrections Department officials at an April budget hearing. Prison union sees safety risks in closures. Amber Rose Howard, the executive director of Californians United for a Responsible Budget, which advocates for reducing a number of prisons and cutting the prison population, said Newsom's proposal to close yards instead of whole prisons misses an opportunity for bigger savings. The truth is, it doesn't go far enough, Howard said. When only a single yard is closed, that means there's still tens of millions of dollars being spent on operational costs and administrative staffing. She noted the state still has 15,000 empty prison beds. These yard deactivations will save $80 million annually, and that's not even equal to the cost savings of one prison closing. Newsom has previously said he wanted to maintain some capacity in the prisons to provide more space for rehabilitation efforts. So that's what they're trying to do, is say, well, we'll leave the prisons open, but we'll change over to we'll make it a rehabilitation facility. We'll change the focus from being a prison, for being, a place where a penitentiary where people are penitent and they're sorry and they're wrong for what they do, and a prison where people are secure and stay there, where people are inmates, and will turn into a treatment facility where they're incarcerated people. But we'll get into what happens when you get too touchy-feely and you do that. The California Correctional Peace Officers Association, the union representing prison guards, because we're peace officers now, we're not prison guards, corrections officers, has argued that shuttering prisons puts guards and inmates in danger. It's a heavy weight in the Capitol, and it supported Newsom. It contributed $1.75 million to help Newsom defeat a recall campaign in 2021, and it gave $1 million back to Newsom's mental health ballot measure that voters approved in March. So that's the issue, not just with Newsom, but with all politicians, is with very, very few exceptions. I mean, you can count on one hand the amount of politicians that haven't been paid for by the establishment. They, get money from special interests and then they owe favors. So Writing in opposition to a bill that would limit the number of empty beds the prison system can maintain, the union said prisons are still holding more inmates than they are designed to. The higher densities of inmates pose substantial risks to CCPOA's membership, as well as other staffs and inmates. The denser populations cause greater risk of assaults and other acts of violence, the union wrote. No fucking shit. You close down the blocks and you take people and you just squeeze them into a smaller space, and you're still going to have issues. So these California jails are holding thousands fewer people, but more people are dying in them. People are dying in custody at record rates across California. They're dying in big jails and small jails, in red counties and blue counties, in rural holding cells and downtown megaplexes. They're dying from suicide, drug overdoses, and the catch-all term, natural causes. Well, that's people die of natural causes in jail. The number of jail deaths is up even though the number of people in jail is down. The state is aware. Reams of reports from oversight agencies have repeatedly pointed to the problems in individual jails and the board that oversees them. Governor Gavin Newsom pledged almost 5 years ago the state would take a stronger hand to prevent deaths in the 57 jail systems run by California county sheriffs. Well, you can say things, but that doesn't mean that make promises, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be able to follow through, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And every year since, more people have died in California jails than when Newsom made the pledge, hitting a high of 215 in 2022. Tulare, San Diego, Kern, Riverside, and San Bernardino County jail set records. Nor was the pandemic the driving factor. California in 2022 had a small share of deaths due to natural causes in the past 4 decades. A surge in overdoses drove the trend in increasing deaths. Almost every person who died was waiting to be tried. 3/4 of those in county jails had not been convicted or sentenced and were waiting trial for more than 3 years. A state board was supposed to put in place measures that would keep inmates safer. Newsom committed to working through that board when he said in 2020, "I've got a board that's responsibility is oversight. I want to see them step things up." But in the years that followed, Newsom and the Board of State Community Corrections were unable to slow the deaths. Until recently, the board was not even notified about the deaths inside the county-run lockups. And a 2021 state auditor's report criticized the board for failing to enforce its own rules and standards on mental health checks and in-cell wellness checks of inmates. The state has begun to take a somewhat stronger role. The governor appointed a formerly incarcerated person to the Board of State and Community Corrections and also signed a bill last year that added to it a licensed healthcare provider and a licensed mental health care, behavioral health care provider. Following through on his 2021 budget proposal to increase the frequency of jail inspections and allow the board to perform them unannounced, Newsom directed an additional $3.1 million each year to the oversight board. The board reported last year it conducted 31 unannounced jail inspections, a change from the past practice when it would visit jail once every 2 years. It told authorities in advance when inspectors were coming. A new law in July would add staff position to review in-custody deaths and a position to be appointed by Newsom and confirmed by the Senate. But critics say those steps have been insufficient. For instance, the original bill would have put jail death monitors in every county. Cal Matters sent 9 questions to the governor about jail deaths, the effectiveness of the state board, his own 2021 pledge to strengthen jail oversight. Newsom's office did not answer the questions, instead sending a list of accomplishments to reflect the governor's extensive record in this space. Those mostly applied to policies for state prisons such as death penalty moratorium. When Cal Matters asked him about high statewide jail deaths at March 1 press conference in Inland Empire, Newsom responded by saying, "The governor just signed legislation to actually be able to create a point person specifically responsible for overseeing what's happening in county jails. Working with Attorney General Rob Bonta, who's been advancing investigations, one very close to home here in Riverside County, related to 18 in-county custody deaths in 2022 with the current sheriff. So, yeah, more than 2,700 people have died in California jails since 2005. So why are so many dying in California jails? The reason people are dying at record rates in California jails are a matter of circumstance. Although in interviews, more than 70 people died in the jail system, from sheriffs and prosecutors to inmates and nurses, some patterns emerged. Natural causes have long accounted for the biggest share of jail deaths, followed by suicides. Suicide prevention should be a higher priority for jail staff, said the University of Texas School Law professor Michelle Deitch, among the nation's foremost authority on deaths in prisons and jails. The vast majority of these deaths are preventable, she said. The causes of a significant numbers of deaths for recent years are still pending, meaning the sheriff's office hasn't yet identified the cause, or the Justice Department hasn't updated the cause in its data collection. But the recent increase in deaths from the third largest cause overall, accidental deaths, including fentanyl overdoses. Overdoses accounted for 43 deaths in 2022. Fentanyl overdoses present a far deadlier challenge now than previous dominant drugs in jails, methamphetamine. Other factors are the same ones cited a few years ago: suicide, failures in healthcare or psychiatric evaluations, and less commonly, violence among inmates or by jail guards. So, yeah, suicides are always going to be a thing. You have policies and procedures in place for those. Accidental deaths, they just call it accidental. I accidentally took drugs. But the fentanyl is a huge, huge incident, problem. And to me, the natural causes, you can't prevent a certain amount of deaths. The suicides, you do the best you can to try to prevent those, but a person that's determined enough, um, you know, to bring something to completion can do something. It's I'm fortunate enough that we're not in a prison environment, that we have someone for a short enough amount of time, and we deal with people that it's that are young enough and have enough to look forward to, that it's not like they're not in jail for or prison for the rest of their lives. So it's not like a uh, situation where they're completely devoid of hope. So um, you know usually we can avoid those types of situations, but something that can be avoided most often is homicides in jail. Especially if it's happening during the day and stuff, and it's something that's witnessed. Um, so we'll get into a few of those instances here. This is from the Sacramento Bee, William Malhado. California prison staff didn't stop murder, posted grisly footage online, lawsuit claims. California corrections officers failed to stop the brutal killing of a 36-year-old man in prison and later shared the video footage of the man being stabbed to death online. A wrongful death lawsuit filed against the state's victim's family this week alleges. Joseph Mendoza was attacked by two inmates with makeshift knives, shivs or shanks, on April 8th on the floor of Salinas Valley State Prison. For over a minute and a half, which is not a lot of time, Edgar Fryer and Nicholas Young repeatedly stabbed Mendoza in the torso, back, and eyes until he was incapacitated, according to video footage of the attack reviewed by the Sacramento Bee. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation identified Fryer, and Young as the attackers in the news release on the day of the incident. The Investigative Services Unit of the Monterey County District Attorney's Office launched an investigation. The federal complaint filed in the Northern District of California alleges that California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation staff failed to follow protocol by not protecting someone in custody by not intervening in the attack earlier. Additionally, lawyers representing the victim's family argue CDCR staff invaded Mendoza's privacy by sharing the footage of his murder. It's pretty standard procedure that anything that happens in jail, the attacks and stuff, that things get shared. So the assumption of privacy in a public institution like that would be kind of difficult to prove. The plaintiff's lawyer said the sharing of the incident on social media violated a California legislator's bill passed in 2020 following the death of basketball legend Kobe Bryant, which bars first responders from sharing footage of deceased victims. CDCR spokesperson Terry Hardy said in a statement the department does not comment on pending litigation. The video of Mendoza's killing, which appears to have been filmed in the perspective of closed-circuit television, I guarantee that's how it was filmed, has been posted on several social media accounts, said Brian Harrison, an attorney representing Mendoza's family. Harrison said it's clear CDCR staff who had access to CCTV footage released it. The dissemination of this footage was malicious, reckless, without any legitimate correctional purpose. It's only served to gratify prurient curiosity of shocked viewers and humiliate Mendoza's family, the complaint reads. The video of her son's death circulating on social media traumatizes Mendoza's mother. Who wants to see your son murdered on social media? He said in an interview. It was the most gruesome murder ever, and I have it in my mind when I wake up. When I get up, it's there. In 2009, Mendoza was convicted in Fresno County over 22 years in 22 years in prison for robbery and attempted murder in Salinas state prison houses, roughly 2,400 minimum and maximum custody incarcerated individuals. So I wonder if his crimes were captured on video. I wonder how his victims feel. Left to die. That's always left out of the consideration. I'm not saying that we shouldn't feel bad for his family. They didn't commit the crimes, didn't participate in their son's killing, but their son, victimized other people, and he certainly wasn't innocent. Left to die. The complaint alleges that Fryer and Young targeted the victim because prison staff confiscated a significant amount of contraband and controlled substances from Mendoza that belonged to gang-affiliated individual in the prison. Mendoza was affiliated with a Norteño prison gang and was aware of threats to his safety after that contraband was confiscated. He requested protective custody, but SVFP staff did not remove him from the general population. The lawsuit alleges. The two attackers, who were allegedly affiliated with the prison gang, just descended upon Mendoza in a high-risk area of the prison facility. High risk according to who? Stabbing him over 100 times in the torso, back, face, neck, and eyes. The complaint states that CDCR staff failed to deploy reasonable force to stop the attack. Despite being armed with Mini 14 rifle within reach and trained to use force to halt the assault, officers stood by and observed Mendoza butchered and left to die, the filing states. Later that day, CDCR released a statement about the attack, stating staff immediately responded and issued several verbal commands to stop, which were ignored. Staff then deployed less than lethal force options, which ultimately quelled the attack. I don't know. I mean, to me at that point, if you have verbal commands at that point, like, I know it's a minute and a half, But verbal commands at that point, you've got to do something at that point. You know, um, I get that they used less than lethal force options. They must have used hit them with some OC spray or something at that point to stop the incident. I guess that was a good decision as far as not getting any of the corrections officers that were there injured. But if you had what is your use of force in, you know, in case of a murder, say, are you authorized to use lethal force in that type of situation? Or, are you using physical force to stop that situation? I've certainly seen corrections officers tackle people that were involved in stabbing situations. Like, verbal commands at that point seems like a little too late. Harrison vehemently disagreed with that statement. He said the video footage attack shows the correctional staff didn't intervene quickly enough or with sufficient force to stop the stabbing. They're trained to respond with lethal force, Harrison said. CDCR announced Sunday that it is investigating its fifth killing at Salinas State Prison after Kevin Torres was found unresponsive in the cell. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. The verbal commands I get, that's the thing that keeps coming up here. Calipatria State Prison officials investigating the death of an incarcerated person as homicide. This is November 10th, 2025. California Department of Corrections rehabilitation officials are investigating the November 10th death of incarcerated person at Calipatria State Prison, Cal, as a homicide. At approximately 10:20 a.m., staff responded to incarcerated persons Eric Gonzalez and Javier Torres attacking incarcerated person Alex Mercado on an exercise yard. Staff immediately responded utilizing chemical agents to quell the attack. Officers immediately restrained Gonzalez and Torres and removed them from the yard, initiated life-saving measures on Mercado, and activated 911. Mercado was transported to an outside medical facility where he was pronounced deceased by Imperial County Coroner at 11:46. No staff or additional incarcerated people were injured. Officers recovered one improvised weapon at the scene. So that's more like it. Sound like they used the chemical agents, but they immediately restrained them, and they were able to stop the attack. Now, I don't know, how close officers were in the first case versus the second case, but the quick actions of these officers were able to at least try to help in the situation, although he still succumbed to his wounds. Luckily, no staff were injured, incarcerated people. Who cares? Who cares if one of the people who perpetrated the attack had a boo-boo or ouchie after that? Gonzalez and Torres have been placed in restricted housing pending an investigation by the Cal Investigative Services Unit. Office of Inspector General was notified, and the Imperial County Coroner will determine Mercado's official cause of death. Yeah, he's fucking stabbed. Mercado was received from Los Angeles County in 2022. He was sentenced to 13 years for second-degree murder and assault with a semi-automatic firearm, with an enhancement for the use of the firearm. Gonzalez, 26, was received from Los Angeles in 2023. He was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole for first-degree murder with the use of a firearm. Torres, 27, was most recently returned for parole from Kern County in 2024. He was sentenced to 6 years for carjacking as a second striker. Cal provides a variety of academic, self-help, and vocational programs that are certified by the National Center for Construction, Education, and Research. The Imperial County Institution houses 2,500 minimum and maximum security people and employs approximately 1,200 people. So this is a facility that's used as an education. No, this is the rehabilitation. This is the educational portion, which, if you're focusing on the education for those that can use it and, are using it in the right manner, that's great. But for people that are multiple strikers that are, looking at life in prison and stuff, like, what the fuck is the point? They're not doing any good with this. Salinas Valley State Prison investigating the death of an incarcerated person as homicide. Soledad. California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR, officials are investigating the November 29, 2025 death of an incarcerated person, Kevin A. Torres, Salinas Valley State Prison, as a homicide. At 9:19 p.m., custody staff conducting a security check in a housing unit approached a cell occupied by Torres and another incarcerated person, not an inmate. Commiefoirnia. Staff discovered that Torres was unresponsive in the cell. Responding personnel immediately initiated life-saving efforts. Torres was transported by ambulance to an outside medical facility, was pronounced deceased at 10:49 p.m. by medical personnel. Farias has been placed in restrictive housing and is pending an investigation by the SVSB Investigative Services Unit in Monterey County District Attorney's Office for potential murder charges. The official office of the Inspector General was notified, and the Monterey County Coroner will determine the official cause of death. Torres, 26, was received by Sonoma County in 2018 to serve a 19-year sentence for second-degree murder with a firearm discharge enhancements, and Farias, 39, was received in 2005 with 12-year sentence for inflicting corporal injury on a spouse, cohabitant, second-degree burglary with assault with a firearm. Yeah. So that was one that they don't really say what the cause of death was between the two, but it was two people in a cell, cause of death. So officers did the best they could in that case. Pelican Bay State Prison officials investigating the death of an incarcerated person as a homicide. Crescent City, November 3rd, 2025. CDCR officials investigating the November 2nd death of an incarcerated person at Pelican Bay as a homicide. At 12:30 p.m., Rodrigo Gomez was allegedly assaulted by incarcerated persons Raul Garcia Jr. and Francisco Ramirez Jr. in a day room within a housing unit. Staff quickly stopped the incident with verbal orders, immediately summoned medical assistance for Gomez, and activated 911. Gomez was transported by ambulance to an outside medical facility. Despite extensive efforts by medical staff, he succumbed to his injuries and was pronounced deceased at 2:24 p.m. by the Del Norte County Coroner. An improvised weapon was recovered at the scene. Gomez, 38, was received sentenced to life with a possibility of parole for the first-degree murder and 4 years for escape from a county jail or prison with force to be served with consecutive to the life with parole sentence. Garcia, 37, was received from Los Angeles in 2008 with sentence to life with the possibility of parole. Ramirez received from Los Angeles in 2010, sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. So, yeah, verbal orders to stop a fucking murder, which is crazy. And that's what gets me, you know, like I get using the um chemical agents, I get using, you know, batons or whatever less lethal means you have if you need to try to stop an attack, but you got to do something. You got to act. Verbal commands when somebody's getting stabbed. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, I don't care what your policy and procedure is. You got to do fucking something. I mean, I understand you got a job to do, but you got to do something to fucking stop it. Like, Jesus Christ. And this is the policy. You know, a lot of it comes down to training and policy and procedure, and they're taught this, the California model. This, you know, Hector Bravo talks about this all the time. This, you know, touchy feely shit with the inmates. California model. It doesn't work. It gets people fucking killed, and um, they focus so much on the rehabilitation that it's causing people to get killed. And that's what kills me. That's what gets me about this. No pun intended there. That was just, yeah. So, you know, the policies and procedures are bad. The policies on the state level are bad, but I hope there are still, you know, I know that there are still men and women in the California jail system and prison system that are out there doing good work, you know, that are, I mean, I gave the one example of ones that still got in there and physically intervened immediately when they saw what was going on. They weren't able to save the person's life, but they did the right thing. You know, there's still people out there doing good work. So, um, you know, we want to support those that are still doing good work behind the California Iron Curtain. Um, we appreciate those people, want to support those people, but goddamn, if it isn't difficult to get down on CDCR and California for their policies, the corruption that goes on, these the kickbacks and stuff that they get for these programs, and where does all the fucking money go for this stuff? And it's not just California, but that's what we were covering today. So, all right, well, not to get too down today, we've got a couple Jake jokes. Did you guys hear about the globe that got pressed flat into a vinyl album? Yeah, it was a world record. Mhm. Yeah, people tell me that they pick their nose, but I was just born with mine. So, oh my goodness, I started a band called 1023 Megabytes. Um, we still haven't gotten a gig, so that's where things are at. Just an update for you guys. All right. Well, appreciate you guys sticking around for another episode of Hard Time, sticking with me. And for myself, I will say good night, Jake.